Welcome to the Inside Scoop Live podcast, where indie authors get personal about their books, their writing, and their passions. I'm your host, Sherry Hoyt. Join me for some lively conversations with debut indie authors and seasoned veterans alike. It's a great place to find your next amazing read or even get inspired. So sit back and enjoy the show and let me know what you think. Hey everyone, today I'm talking with Jennifer Yeates Camara about her debut poetry release, Reduction Fired. Often expressed in constructed minimalism and parallels, Reduction Fire is described as architectural with a nod to West Coast contemporary design and Eastern influences. Before we get started, here's the inside scoop on Jennifer. Jennifer Yeates Camara is a poet living in Vancouver, Canada. She is the youngest of 13 children born to an extremely poor family in Ontario, Canada. She grew up in an old house that someone had paid her father to haul away, without plumbing as the water was never hooked up. Jennifer's early life in the 70s included an outhouse, a well, and a wood-burning fireplace. Jennifer's parents were both avid readers and often recited poems by memory. Reading was ingrained in her siblings too, and Jennifer learned quickly. At age 9, Jennifer's family, still at home, moved to the BC coast. Jennifer was encouraged to join a late French immersion group starting from grade 6. It was around that time Jennifer also started writing her own poetry. Although she continued excelling academically, the family's economic situation was still dire, and she turned to poetry to express herself. Once Jennifer started working, she eagerly frequented local bookstores where the owners introduced her to poetry from many cultures, including Persia, China, Japan, and India. For more information about Jennifer Yeates Camara, visit her website at yatescamara.com. Well, hi, Jennifer. Welcome to Inside Scoop Live.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me.
To get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about your book, Reduction Fired?
Really, I'm hoping to move forward with my poetry and learning, and I just needed to sort of close that chapter and compile a selection of poems that I had written and put it together. And it was important to me to put it out there and see where I was at, I guess you could say. Just sort of see the feedback and know where I am and where I need to go further. But it's a collection basically compiled in a bit of a reverse order that it was written. So it's broken up into seasons, and the seasons are really just time periods. So the ones in spring were written early on in my years, and the ones in winter were written more recently.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I was sure you had some kind of theme, dividing it up into the 4 seasons, but that's interesting. Yeah, I like that. I love the title. How did you come up with the title, Reduction Fired, and what is the meaning behind the title?
Well, my mother had taken pottery when she was younger and loved it, and loved the glazes especially, and so often told us stories from those days. And one of the things she told us was about this type of firing, this technique called reduction fired. So when you're firing a piece in the reduction method, you take the piece that you've glazed and you put it in the kiln, and then you slowly reduce the oxygen. So in that process, there's less and less oxygen for the fire, for that fuels the fire. The fire might look for fuel, and so it might actually even pull oxygen from the piece and pull it out to the surface. And it just struck me this way as something unique that a lot of us go through. We're all reduction fired in a sense, and in the things that we go through, the traumas and difficulties, years we spend in difficult situations that really challenge us. And it's like someone has reduced the oxygen in our environment, and we have to pull out from inside us something meaningful, something to cope with these situations. And much like a reduction fired piece, you don't always know the result. The potter may not know exactly, be able to pinpoint exactly what the end result's going to be. They can kind of ballpark it, but they don't know as exactly as they can with other firing techniques, because you don't know what's inside the piece. You can't really tell.
That is fascinating, and that transfers into your poetry, I guess, due to your condensed writing style?
Yes. Well, I could see that in other forms of writing as well, ancient forms of writing where they use only a few words to say what they want to say, and yet it still seems eloquent and conversational, and they get their point across and the image and in such few words, whether it's haiku or Hebrew poetry, ancient Hebrew poetry. They just have this way of using small, not complicated constructs or anything like that, just very simply stated and straightforward, but really powerful, and how it made it more powerful. And so I was just really experimenting with trying to grow and challenge myself to do that.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like flash fiction, where you tell a story in like 100 words. Or
Short stories can be really difficult to write for that reason. You really have to make it tight and make sure there aren't any disposable pieces in there. It's that simplicity, and that's kind of where I get the architectural reference from. In the book, at the beginning, I quote Frank Lloyd Wright, how he said to reduce the whole of its parts to its simplest terms, getting back to first principles. So, like a culinary reduction, you're reducing it and trying to make it more powerful and have more impact.
Yeah. I was excited when I saw that you mentioned Frank Lloyd Wright in your book. It's my husband's favorite architect, and a lot of the things in our home is designed in that style. So.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah. You also call your style West Coast contemporary. So why do you use architecture and West Coast contemporary as comparisons in your work?
Right. I guess the architecture, because I put so much effort in the structure of the lines, the lines are short, but sometimes they're broken in such a way, and sometimes I succeed at this, and quite honestly, sometimes I don't. Some people may struggle with the line breaks, but my goal is to try to break the lines sometimes where you're not quite sure where it's heading until you get to the end, and then you know where it was meant to go. But the lines might break in such a way that the first and second line you might think it's going here, and then you read the third line, it's not, it's going somewhere else. So it's a lot of effort I put into the structure, and so I guess that's partly the architectural point. And West Coast Contemporary is a style of architecture from the West Coast, whether it's from British Columbia down to California. So it's known for its linear modern simplicity, and it's known for using a lot of glass to bring nature in, and then using this mix of modern materials and natural materials, a lot of cedar, for example, for its warm orange color and those kinds of things. So nature is important, and keeping the lines simple and minimalist. That's, I guess, why I use those as comparisons for this book.
Yeah, what a beautiful style.
Yeah, there was even I had seen with a friend, there was a documentary done at one of the local film festivals, and it's called West Coast Contemporary, and it covers just how that style sort of developed and elements of that style, and just this moving away from clutter and keeping it simple, but keeping it close to nature. And I think nature here, it's different in that, I mean, there's nature all over the world, beautiful, but it's just very accessible. And the cities didn't cut down swaths of trees to put up the city. They left all the trees and kept them. So it's beautiful green, and it's close. The variety is close. You've got the mountains and you've got the water, and so you have all that variety. And here, a temperate rainforest. So it's quite a lot to pull from.
Yeah, I've always heard the West Coast is particularly beautiful, and I've been there, but I was very young in age, so I don't really remember that time. So this is your debut poetry collection, but you've been working on it, as you said, for a number of years. When did you start writing poetry?
Oh, I have this recollection of writing a poem about a shark when I was 11. So our family all write and read, but they all have different forms of writing that they like, whether it's fiction or it's plays or poetry or whatever it might be. My parents both loved poetry, and so it just seemed natural anyone with a love of language, it's got its appeal. it draws you, I guess. So I just always had that love of language and poetry. And so, yeah, I guess it was at least 11, if not earlier. Yeah.
Wow.
And I've been writing since. I just really enjoy it.
Yeah. So how do you write? Like, do you have a writing style? What does your writing routine look like? In other words, does inspiration kind of just fall into your lap out of nowhere, or do you sit down and like consciously create?
Well, a little of both. It depends. Usually I am mulling something over for a while and some sort of experience or emotion that's been happening. And usually I'm out at a cafe or and looking around me, whatever might be. And so I wrote a couple of poems at a cafe I frequented. One's about the tree. I wrote Snowfall there, and the one I did about the Japanese maple, that was on the patio. And I'm just looking out and seeing these things over time. And so it comes to me there. Once I was just standing at an outdoor plaza, and the cold breeze just caught me off guard, and I sat down on the bench and started to write. So it's a bit of a process. It's helpful for me to be at the computer and write there, but I also write just in a little book and that I might keep with me, and so that when those moments happen, I can capture them and start writing. But so it's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of both.
Yeah. Well, I guess you can't dictate inspiration, right?
No, unfortunately you can't. And there were times when I was just too overloaded with other things to be able to write properly. You do need some time to focus and the proper frame of mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's true for any kind of writing. Yeah.
I agree.
So, what are some of the different poetic forms used in Reduction Fired, and do you have a favorite?
Well, there's quite a variety. So I know that some poetry books will just have one very specific form and very specific theme, but this one has a bit more diversity than that. So some of the more recent are really condensed. Some of the ones in winter, so they're a little thick and dense, like sort of wading through something thick to get through. And then others in summer, a little less, a little looser. And I do experiment, whether it's from something short with the short lines and still conversational like enough, to something like citing, where I just wanted to experiment with something slightly different, a little more rhythmic and lyrical. And I even write sonnets. In spring, I have a couple of sonnets there. And then I experimented also in the early years, you'll see in spring, and I still carry that with me, that just that idea of Hebrew poetry and the way they structure parallels. It's quite interesting poetically. So anything like that interests me and that challenges me, I'd like to try to work with it and challenge myself to grow. And the only way I can do that is by attempting to work through it. So there's quite a few different forms. I even do haiku. I have some books of haiku that I really enjoyed, and so I experiment with that as well. Some are more loose, so I describe them as thoughts after reading haiku. They don't adhere to all the strict guidelines of a haiku, not all of them, but they are this, one thought in one image, but layered as much as I can in that particular poem.
Yeah. So has your idea of what poetry is changed since you began writing?
It certainly seems to have changed over time. Like when you read poetry now, what's happening right now is it seems very, very much a thought, a musing, just a conversational component to it. And even though the poets themselves are really working hard to take out words and to pare it down, and it does seem quite loose now and quite free. It depends on the person writing, obviously. But so it has changed a lot. my idea of poetry, I still draw influence from a lot of the classical writers. And so I don't know sometimes if my style fits in, to be honest, with the current more loose and just expressions of thought that are out there now. I guess because I really love the language component of poetry, the working with language as a material and using it in so many different ways, and reading it, but having it there written out, being able to do different things with it in writing than you could necessarily spoken. And I just love it. So I do think poetry has changed. I mean, I keep changing myself, but I don't know that I fit necessarily with what is out there right now sometimes.
Right.
But I don't mind that. I think it's great for people to have that variety and to choose the aspects of different poets that appeal to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to write what you love and what you, if you don't, that's going to come across to your readers, I feel like. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely it will. Yeah, I agree with that.
Are all of your poems based on personal experiences? And what stages of your life, or what stage has most influenced your writing?
Yeah, different stages have influenced it. They are written from personal experience, at least my perception at the time. So whether that was really the case, or I just, for example, some of where I just felt I was being so harassed and felt so bullied, and whether I was really being harassed and bullied by everybody at the time, or just felt that way. But yeah, different stages, different things. So, for example, in spring, the two themes I touch on are this connection I had with this person, this man, and we just both realized it wasn't going to work. So I just was left with feelings for him. And I just experiment with the forms that I had then. And then a friend of mine who passed away, depression just finally took her. She took herself. And so those stages affect me. It's summer. I was married. It was a very intense time and a lot of things going on. It tends to be more passionate and more sultry. And then where autumn, again, I'm experimenting with different things, and I'm going through a lot of where I'm feeling this harassment or other things, just different feelings. So yes, they all sort of come from personal experience, for sure. For me, I know some people write just based on themes. Some people write activism, and they write based on things that are important politically, and I just haven't gone there myself yet. They're more about things that are just very personal.
Yeah.
But what influenced me the most, it's really hard to say. I guess I would probably say the struggle with my own imperfections. I would say that kind of comes up as a recurrent theme, probably. That one, and just processing my emotions for other people and with other people, relationships of different kinds. But definitely, especially in the earlier years, just struggling with imperfection, probably.
Yeah. Many people are discouraged from enjoying poetry, claiming it's too difficult or intimidating. And I am one of those people.
Right.
So I want to ask you what kind of suggestions or encouragement you can give to people in this situation. And then I also wanted to say that I found that even though I might not understand, or I might not think I understand it, that several of your poems did touch me. You mentioned one of them earlier, Enough. I think that one was my favorite. And then the one about your friend. So, I guess maybe I know more than I claim to know, or...
Well, and that's just it. I really feel that there have been accessible options over the years. Metaphysical poetry was always really tough for people, and in 17th century English poetry and in English and literature, And some of the students, you could just see them just really, it means this and that, and the other doesn't really.
Mm-hmm.
And they just wanted something straightforward, They wanted clarity, and yet there were also in the 17th century the Cavalier poets who were very, very clear, very straightforward. Wrote on things like John Smeckling's poem about faithfulness or constancy. About I've been in love 3 whole days. I might even love 3 more. You never know. Things like that. I think there are accessible options. I don't think the more accessible options are necessarily always the lighter. You can be clear and still be deep and still talk about really important things. Rupi Kaur is a popular poet these days, extremely popular. She just writes in that style of a thought, expressing a thought and a feeling, and those feelings resonate with people. Mm-hmm. And if that's accessible to people, that's wonderful. And I think she's got 4 books. I think they've sold millions. And that just tells me there are a lot of people who appreciate someone speaking their feelings.
Right.
And there's always those who like the stories, whether it's Robert Service or any of those kinds of narrative kind of poems that just tell a story, and the rhythm and the rhyme just really take people. And they say, and I remember reading somewhere, and I can't remember where it was. There was a cowboy poetry festival, and they said that cowboy poetry was one of the most popular forms of poetry in English.
Really?
Yeah, so that surprised me. I didn't realize there was such a following of writers and readers of that style. But so I really believe that there are accessible options out there, and I don't think they're talking down to people by being simple and clear. It's just a different way of expressing the same meaningful feelings and the same intensity, just in a different way. Mm-hmm. I would just love for people to be able to look around and see styles that really connect with them, and whatever it might be, and not to give up, and not to think it's all metaphysical and it's all it's all Shakespeare. It can be very accessible and very clear, and they don't have to think about what does it mean, this, that, and the other thing, and all of it. They can just experience it. I would just love for people to just experience it and enjoy it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that, 'cause I feel like that's what I try to do. Okay, what does this mean?
Right.
And so,
right.
That's okay, but then I go back and I read it again, and sometimes it takes me a couple times to read through it, but
right.
I guess that could be with anything, but people like to be able to relate to what they're reading, and so that's why I love the idea of cowboy poetry, because that just that says there's something for everyone. There
really is. Yeah, I agree. And like with a song, you might enjoy a song and then look up the lyrics. Mm-hmm. So I would encourage people to just let yourself enjoy it and speak to you and your experience first, and then you can go and look it up and look up, and then read it, as you say, a few times and try to understand what they were trying to say. And you can get more out of it, but don't forget to enjoy it as well.
Mm-hmm. And maybe it means something totally different to you than what the author has intended.
That's very true. And we don't own it. Once it's out there, it's out there. And I would love for people to find things in it that mean something to them. And that's a wonderful thing. And it becomes so much more than what I was trying to get across. Maybe I was trying to get across something very straightforward, but someone else takes it and sees something completely different in it. And that's not a bad thing. I remember in high school I used to think that was a bad thing. I used to think it just means what it means, and that's it. But it's okay for people to see in it. I think that's quite a compliment, actually, to have someone see something in it that relates to them and their experience and helps them identify with their feelings. So, no, that's encouraging, when people do that.
Yeah. What kind of feedback have you received from readers about Reduction Fired?
Well, it's been so overwhelmingly good. I was really pleasantly surprised. A lot of people writing these days have the degrees, They have the Bachelor of Arts, and they've got the creative writing, and they've got the poetry, and they've got all these things from all the great institutions, and that's lovely, and I think they must have learned so much. I haven't had that opportunity in my life to have that. I was always supporting somebody else and having to support myself, and we don't all have the same circumstances. I would certainly love that opportunity to go to school. I just haven't had that, so I was just quite pleased that the response has been as good as it has. People have been very good. The only things they seem to trip over seems to be structural. So whether it's the fact that I didn't say in the poetry book what the seasons represented to me, so they just saw them broken up into seasons and thought, well, should Scarecrow then be under fall for autumn, or why is it here, and that kind of thing, which I totally understand. So I love that kind of feedback too, because that helps me. Then I can address it. I can go to my website or whatever, and I can address it, explain what I didn't explain in the book for those who need it. And that's helpful feedback for me. It's like editorial feedback. It's great. But overwhelmingly, people have been really... one reviewer commented that because of the line breaks that I tend to use, some people, aren't sure what to make of them. And this part, one reviewer said I was like the Jackson Pollock of poetry. Well, that's quite a compliment.
Right? Yeah.
Wow. So yes, it has been overwhelmingly positive. I've been really pleased with that. I can only be pleased since it's just coming from someone who's generally otherwise unknown, otherwise without connections in the writing world, and to put something out there and get good feedback. It's overwhelming, so I'm very pleased with it.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's great. I imagine it was quite scary to put yourself out there like that. It would have been for me. How did you feel putting your book out into the world?
It's a risk for sure, but I just felt like I had to do it. I needed to put it out there, and I don't know what I was expecting. I wasn't really expecting anything. But I just felt like I needed to do it. I needed to finish something that I had thought of doing some years ago. I was sick for a while, and then I recovered, so it just seemed the right time, and I wanted to finish it. And so I was thinking of it last year, and then I just started the process. I mean, there is a risk, but I guess there's also a risk to not doing something. And I was always told that there are consequences to acting, and we often get afraid of those consequences, and so we don't act. But that's also a consequence. There's also a consequence to that, of not acting, of not doing something. And can you live with those consequences of not making a decision? Right. So I just did it.
Hooray for you.
I would encourage you to do, though, if you are thinking, anyone who's thinking of it, I do think every person has that unique voice, and it's important to get their voice out there, because you never know who it will connect with. And I wouldn't want someone to hold back because they think, well, I mean, looking out there, I can't say I looked out there and I saw people and said, oh, they're like me. I didn't see anyone who was like me. But I wanted to do it anyway. And I think it's important to do that.
Yeah. That actually reminds me of your poem Leaving, which I hope you'll read for us. To me, it was about stepping out of your comfort zone, and that's what you just talked about. So I wonder if you would read a couple of your poems for us.
Sure. That would be lovely. I appreciate the opportunity. It's very nice. I love reading aloud. I always joke that in school I was never chosen to act in school plays. I was always chosen to be narrator. No matter what, I couldn't get away from it. So I do love to read. I can start with Leaving. Leaving is a little more, it's one of those condensed ones, and it's a little more thicker to go through. But yeah, hopefully the meaning comes through to people, and I think seems to have for you. So that's good. So I will go ahead if you like.
Yes, please do. Thank you.
Leaving. It became comfortable, the imprints of the many. Uneven stones, gnarled roots, and matted leaves etched the length of me, through my own weight, all released, until it became uncomfortable, without their rough and grazing pressure, too familiar and too old to trace the memory. So I now find this stance on my own weight held up through the soles of me, and this skin smooth like petals basking, though unmapped and untouched, but by the bees and hummingbirds buzzing and hovering respectfully, or fingertips caressing gently. All so unexpectedly intriguing that, unnerved with anticipation, I'm yet startled by how much it feels even innate, deep-rooted through and through me, being me, unbranded. It's become glorious.
That's lovely.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I am so glad that you read it out loud, because first of all, I think you're fantastic at reciting, and I can see why you were the narrator. So, and then second of all, it helps me to say I don't have to read it, just like it became comfortable. The imprints of the many. You know, I don't have to stop at the end of each line. So I'm getting a poetry lesson today. I love this.
Well, and that's just it. Some of them, you will roll, some of the lines and words will roll into each other, but you can go back and see, if you choose to go back, you can just read it as you want to read it. And then if you choose to go back and say, oh, why would she have broken uncomfortable there, or why? And then think about if that's what you want to do, but you don't have to. You know, with poetry, you can just enjoy it.
Right. Well, thank you. Do you have any more you'd like to read to us?
Well, I'll read warmth. So I talk a little bit in my bio about growing up and the way we grew up. So we had a wood stove, and we had no running water. And even though we're in Canada, you think you think, how is this possible? And our neighbors, we had a neighbor 2 doors down who had a live-in nanny every year. They had a different nanny from Europe, and
oh my gosh.
They had a car for the nanny. Like, it was just, the disparity was incredible. And it was just, for my little brain, I was so young at the time. It was just hard for me to understand.
Right.
But the winters were always really hard because it was just so cold. And it was just always so cold. And we had single pane windows, so you get frost on the inside. And sometimes it was so cold, my mother would just take off, like, every coat that she could find. She would just try to bury all the kids in the coats to make sure they wouldn't. She was actually afraid they were going to die of exposure. Like, it was bad. So for me, for this poem, I just was relating that. It was one of those things that came back to me when I was in this relationship, and I realized, why do I always need you for warmth, like for emotional warmth? Why do I do that? And so I was kind of exploring that idea with being cold when I was younger. So that's where that came from. So I will go ahead and read that.
Okay.
Warmth. I only realized today what it was and how it started, this always wanting more. This standing, shivering and vulnerable, palms outstretched to the crackling logs of your days, glad at each spark of time, knowing only the need to get warm. Recalled being buried so deep in blankets and all the coats Mom could find that come morning I would dress under covers and hurry down to sit inside the window box of sun-warmed carpet with both hands holding my cup. I'm still rummaging for comforters, for smiles and approving looks, and time with you to lie beneath, to place between me and the cold. So even now, there are times flakes blow through the cracks, and frost maps out my window pane, and all the flames and coats and sun are not enough. And I just wanted you to know, I realized today it wasn't you, that I'll always be wanting more warmth.
That's beautiful.
Well, it's just, I guess, a lot of poetry is sort of self-exploration. And so you kind of go, why am I putting so much importance on you to make me feel warm as a person? And why can't I generate my own warmth? And so you kind of explore that.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for that. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
You mentioned in the beginning that this collection has kind of been a work in progress for many, many years, and that you wanted to get it out so you can move on. So what is next for you? What do you want to explore going forward?
Well, I would like to focus on the quality. I just want to improve and learn and develop. So however I can do that. It's hard finding the right course, but if I can find a course that might help, or find some other poets that I can connect with, and whatever way I can do it, I just need at this point to develop further. I'm looking ahead. I'm healthier and happier than I have been in years, and so I'm really looking forward to whatever the next chapter will bring and what I can write about in future. And what will the title of the next one be? Who knows? But I'm looking forward to writing more, and I've already started that, to write, just knocking some things around in my head, and personal development is what's next for me. I just, as a writer, my sister Regan is learning. She's taken several courses. She writes fiction, youth fiction, and she just gets so much out of that. She's now attending the Golden Egg Academy in the UK, which is geared for youth fiction, and she's learning so much. She's just thrilled, and so she just, as a big sister, she just wants the same thing for me. She wants me to have that same opportunity to develop, and other people to ask the right questions, and so I can move forward.
Yeah, wonderful. How fun, too.
Yes, I think I will.
Yeah. Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing a little bit about yourself and your work.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been wonderful. It's just been a joy.
Thank you for joining me today for my interview with Jennifer Yeates Camara, author of Reduction Fired. For more information about Jennifer and her work, visit her website at yatescamara.com. And be sure to check out our other interviews at InsideScoopLive.com.